What's up guys, and welcome back to another video here on the Archi-Tech network. So in this video I wanted to do a quick overview on the software that is currently being used in our industry. I think it can be a little overwhelming, particularly coming out of university, that there are like thousands of programs that you need to learn how to use and that you need to be proficient at them to get a job. At the same time, we're seeing that some things that are being taught in university don't necessarily align with what is needed in practice. So based on the last 9 years of working in practice, I wanted to go through and talk a little bit about what each program is used for and which ones I recommend you equip yourself as an aspiring architect. I'll also go through at what level I recommend you should be at depending on the stage of your career as an architect, or if you want to become a specialist, what skill set you might need. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and let's take a look. Alright guys, let's jump in and take a look at some of the programs and technologies that we use in practice almost on a day-to-day basis. As a modern architect, the tools and technologies we equip ourselves with are very important. Regardless of if you want to be a pure concept design, or you want to be a technical architect, or even a specialist of some kind, all of them depend heavily on how well you equip yourself with a design technology skill set. At the same time, I do appreciate that there are so many programs that you hear out there. Different people recommend different things. It can be super confusing. But from my perspective of working in practice for the last almost 10 years, you do see a lot of the same programs being used by a lot of architects around the world. Of course, this does differ from the regions you've worked in. But for example, I've worked in London, Hong Kong, and New York, and there is a pretty standard base of tools and technologies that a lot of architects use. On top of that, you also get these kind of terms like BIM, computational design, AR, VR, parametrics, rendering, all these kind of techie terms, which kind of compounds the confusion of what all these things really mean and what you have to learn. So in this video, what I've done is simplify things into these 6 categories: modeling, computation, BIM, visualization, graphics, and immersive. We'll touch base on all of these and a few of the terms that come with them, but these are the areas that I think you need to equip yourself with to future-proof yourself as a digitally fluent architect, otherwise known as an architect. First category, we're jumping into modeling. So modeling, what is modeling? This is our 3D modeling side, the base modeling program that we typically design in. Like every firm typically has their go-to modeling program that they spend most of their time in designing. And that modeling program, that is not BIM. So we're not talking about Revit, ArchiCAD, or any of those things. Those are in their own category. We typically have a space where we are kind of slightly more unconstrained and we design in. So under this category, the first program we'll start off with is Rhino, or Rhinoceros, right? This is number 1 on the list for many reasons. It's widely used. It's kind of constraint-free. You can do linear form all the way to freeform geometry, particularly with sub-D in Rhino 7. It's used all the way from like concept design all the way through to fabrication, so it's very versatile in terms of all the design stages. And of course, it has the computational side with Grasshopper. And Rhino is one of the most widely used programs out there for many architects. Second on the list, we have SketchUp. SketchUp is incredibly accessible, easy to learn. It's a great entry-level program for students, or even students at school that are interested in architecture. I recommend to just play around with SketchUp to learn about 3D modeling. It comes with massive libraries online and resources. Many architects do use SketchUp. It's not something that I personally use because it does have its limitations. It has quite a lot of constraints, and of course it kind of lacks a computational side, but it has to be included on the list because a lot of architects do use SketchUp. Next up, we have Maya. So from here on in, we're kind of into the more niche programs. Maya is typically used for more free-form geometry. That's what it's stereotypically used for, although it's quite a powerful modeling platform. It's very sketch based, so you can create very quick, fluid ideas. For example, firms like Zaha use Maya as their primary design tool, as well as a few other kind of like niche firms that have that kind of Zaha style in terms of geometry. Next up, we have 3ds Max. I actually started my Archi-Tech skill set in 3D Max. Typically, it's used for visualization, not so much for architects to design in, although it does come with some really powerful animation-based modifiers and things like that. But typically, it's used for, you'll see the high-end renders, they're typically using 3ds Max and something like V-Ray. Blender, I actually don't have too much experience using Blender, but I hear more and more about it. I feel like it's the new kid on the block in terms of modeling programs. It's an open source modeling program, which is interesting as it allows you to get under the hood of how it actually works. But I generally see this being used for more animation and freeform kind of experimental design, but it's definitely one to keep your eye on in the future. Lastly, we have Cinema 4D. This is similar to 3ds Max. I generally see this being used more for visualization type work. It's really powerful for animation-based stuff. So you're interested in that, Cinema 4D would be a good one, especially if you've seen those Instagram style continuous loops animations. It's often using Cinema 4D. Some architects do use it to model stuff, but I wouldn't say it's super popular. So out of these modeling platforms, I think these two, I have to say, are the most widely used. I was a SketchUp user at one point. I'm not anymore. So I have to be honest and say that these two are the most used throughout the architecture industry. The rest of them, you're getting into a more niche animation-based kind of programs. But for example, if you really want to work at Zaha, for example, MAD and these kind of firms, you might want to focus on programs like Maya. But my advice out of all these programs, I think Rhino is the best all-around program. That is what I see 90% of firms that you would have heard of all around the world using, especially if they're design firms. So that would be my recommendation as a modeling platform to focus on. So next up, we've got computation. So first of all, what exactly is computation? So computation or computational design is when we're utilizing the computational power of your computer to design things. A computer is good at processing loads amount of information really quickly, mathematics, all those kind of things. We will do an in-depth video on what exactly is computational design, but it's a term that really encompasses some of these other things that you would have heard of. Computational design, parametric design, generative design, they all to me fit under the computational design umbrella. You could actually call it CAD, computer aided design, but that term has been kind of linked with AutoCAD and 2D drawing. So the first one, and probably the primary one on this list, is of course Grasshopper. Grasshopper is a plugin for Rhino that allows us to start to use visual-based programming to do things in Rhino, and it's an incredibly powerful plug onto Rhino. It's a big part of why I would recommend Rhino as a great modeling platform, is also just because it has Grasshopper. Many firms use Grasshopper as in part of their design process and their documentation process. It is, I would say, the industry standard for a computational program. Next up, we have Rhino Inside, which is cheating a little bit because it's really just Grasshopper for, at the moment, Rhino Inside Revit. So it allows us to continue what we've learned in that Rhino and Grasshopper space and bring that into Revit so that we can do the same things that we can do in Rhino, but with Revit. We can get into the under the hood, so to speak, of both Rhino and Revit. So that it's cheating a little bit because it's also one of my most used programs. Then of course we have Dynamo. Dynamo is the pure Grasshopper equivalent to Revit. So we can use Dynamo to get under the hood of Revit and deal with all the things like create geometry and all that kind of stuff. Of course, Rhino Inside Revit is now competing with that area, but if you're more in as a technical architect or you're in the documentation stages, you spend a lot of time in Revit, for example, Dynamo is going to be your computational tool of choice before Rhino Inside came about. So, but I just wanted to put it in there so you know what Dynamo exactly is. And then, of course, beyond those programs, you then have some kind of coding language. Typically, I see Python being the most used programming language in the AEC industry. Of course, that could have its, I could do another stage just on the different coding languages, but for simplicity, I'm going to say Python is probably going to be the best one if you really want to get into coding. And this is typically more used for very advanced workflows and specialists. So, you know, if you're more interested in design and you're a more design-based architect, Grasshopper, I would highly recommend to start to understand at least the basics of Grasshopper and what it can actually do. If you're more in the documentation stages and you're more interested in BIM, then Rhino Inside and Dynamo is going to be your computational tools of choice. And like I said, Python or some kind of coding language you typically get into in very advanced workflows. You even are dipping your toes into tool creation and software development and that kind of stuff. It's typically more by specialists, but still a great skill set to have. But out of all of these, my biggest recommendation would be to start to learn a bit of Grasshopper, at least understand what it can do, and start to integrate it into your own design process. All right, next up we have BIM. Of course, BIM stands for Building Information Modeling. It's essentially an environment where you're working in 3D and 2D at the same time. Your models are full of information that's needed to actually build the thing that you're modeling or designing. Predominantly, you could kind of simplify how we are using BIM in practice now by saying that we use it for, it's our documentation tool, it's our communication tool, and it's a collaboration tool. At the moment, by far, the most popular BIM platform is Revit. It's kind of the industry standard. It's a powerful documentation tool. It kind of automates a little bit the drawing processes because you're kind of slicing your 3D model. One of the things that made it super popular was its parametric families, which is the ability to essentially make a block and it adapts to different sizes if you're coming from the Rhino world. It also comes with a host of other programs that support it, like BIM 360 and all these other kind of Autodesk programs that interlink with Revit. It's not the best modeling platform. You know, you don't tend to see many firms designing in Revit directly, but it is the documentation tool for many firms around the world. Next up, we have ArchiCAD, probably the next most popular BIM platform. It is a bit more flexible from what I see in terms of modeling. You do see people doing a little bit more design, for example, in ArchiCAD than you do Revit. It did also have some good early interoperability with Grasshopper, for example, but it doesn't come with the advantage of parametric families like Revit does, nor do I see the collaboration side is quite as strong as Revit, and those are the kind of reasons why I tend to hear that Revit is a bit more popular than ArchiCAD, but again, in its own right, it is a great BIM platform. And look out in your region what practices are using, because in some parts of the world, ArchiCAD can be a little bit more popular. Next up, we have Vectorworks. I don't have much experience with Vectorworks, but I do see Vectorworks as like a kind of earlier version of BIM. It's almost like spanning the worlds between your Revit and your AutoCAD era. It does have a really great kind of 2D drafting program. It seems to be really flexible in terms of like drawing. You can kind of stretch and manipulate drawings quite quickly. It's also not a bad modeling platform. I do see people, you know, drawing and modeling in it. I do tend to hear that Vectorworks is being used more by smaller firms, like those boutique firms that are maybe focusing on residential rather than larger firms. So if that's something you're interested in, maybe Vectorworks is the one for you. And finally, I thought I'd put AutoCAD in here because yes, AutoCAD is not strictly a BIM platform, although we could have a debate whether AutoCAD is or isn't a BIM platform. But I do have to acknowledge that AutoCAD is still a highly used program, and the reason why I put it under this category is BIM is typically how we document our buildings. That's where we create our drawings, our sheet sets, and all this kind of stuff, and AutoCAD fills that function for a lot of people. So I do have to put it in here in its own subcategory under 2D drafting, because it is still a very used program throughout the industry. Out of all of these, like I said, Revit is the industry standard, and a huge component of BIM is collaboration. So, the fact that you're on Revit as an architect means that you also have to ideally have your consultants are also on Revit, and you can use the kind of whole Autodesk suite of tools that allow you to do that. So, for that reason, Revit is the industry standard, and would be why my recommendation for the BIM platform to use. And also right now, if you're coming out of university or you're a fairly recent graduate of Part 1 or Part 2, having a Revit skill set can be really, really valuable right now. So it's a great thing to add to your own design technology skill set. All right, so visualization, of course, this is a really important one, especially as young architects or students coming out of university. Visualization is essentially how we communicate our ideas. It doesn't really need much definition. Of course, visualization also, you get terms like rendering and CGIs, but it's how we create diagrams, animation, even virtual reality experiences. It's how we bring our ideas to life. And for many years, the most popular visualization program has been V-Ray. It's been the kind of industry leader for years. It's great for really high quality rendering. You get architects using it, but also visualization specialists themselves. It's a plugin for many programs like Rhino, Revit, Maya, 3ds Max. And it's really the industry standard for super high quality images. It does have a learning curve to it, like you do need to learn all the parameters to get really good at it, but of course it gives you the ability to create those super high quality images, and you can create images and also animations with it. Next up, Enscape is really part of this new era that we're seeing coming into the industry, and this new era of real-time rendering. Although V-Ray, I think, does now have its own real-time rendering capabilities, Enscape has really simplified visualization for architects. It's really easy to use, it's a very low barrier to entry, and it's kind of automated a lot of those things, like, the sun, the sky just looks like good. You don't have to spend time tweaking parameters. It also has seamless integration with workflows, particularly with like Rhino and Revit. So there's not much, special workflows you have to do just for visualization. And because of this new real-time rendering era where, gone are the days of, maybe you can call it the V-Ray era, where you set your scene up, you hit render, half an hour later you might see what the image actually looks like. Enscape is more like walking around a video game. Everything is rendered in real time. You can see the textures, you can see the lighting, you can play with the lighting in real time. And then what's awesome about this is it gives you the ability to just go around, explore your project, so it can be used as a design tool, and then just create renders. You kind of extract the renders, you can create animation, diagrams, VR experiences, all within the same workflow. So it's very easy to kind of, you set up your model and you set up your scene, which is very similar to how you work in Rhino, for example, anyway. But then you can create all of these, you can extract all of these things from it. And because of that, it's really kind of taking the industry by storm. But it's not the only kind of program in this space. We also have Twinmotion and Luminon. So Twinmotion is really Enscape's kind of closest competitor, I would say. Twinmotion is based on the Unreal game engine, so it also creates really great images. It's also great for animation. It has some really great animation capabilities. What's also really interesting is that it acts as a portal to the actual Unreal game engine, and also because it's based in Unreal, you can access many of the assets from the Unreal world, which is huge. So Twinmotion is also another one that I see being used a lot in-house for many firms. Luminon, I think, was one of the earlier programs in this real-time rendering space. I don't use Luminon that much, but last time I used it, it kind of has this rendering aspect and this real-time aspect. You kind of move around and then the image kind of becomes clearer and clearer. It is really nice for high quality images. You can do some really nice animation with it as well. I think that people walk around and all that kind of stuff. And it also is quite well known or being used within the landscape era, landscape architects, because it does have a pretty good set of like trees and planting and foliage and all that kind of stuff. So those I would say are part of this new era of real-time rendering. The final one I would include is Octane. I really include this, again, I don't have much experience with it, but I do see that because we mentioned Cinema 4D before, Octane I do see being used more in the Cinema 4D world. And whenever you see those kind of Instagram-y animations, it's often rendered in Octane. And one of the reasons I included it is because a friend of mine, Ame, who is the amazing architect on Instagram, that's how he creates his images. I think also Beeble, that's what he creates his images using. So if you're quite interested in creating those Instagram animation kind of things, that's what's being used. So maybe not architecture, but if you're interested in that, then Octane is the one. So as I say, overall, I think V-Ray is definitely the industry standard for quality, but this new real-time rendering era is really being led by these three platforms. As I say, for me, Enscape at the moment is the best kind of overall package. Twinmotion is really great for animation, and Luminon is how you're able to achieve high quality in this kind of, whilst also having that benefits of real-time rendering. Out of all of them, at the moment, I would say my favorite is my most used program is Enscape, but I am also using Twinmotion more and more, particularly because I'm interested in the Unreal game engine. So for me, that would be my kind of recommendations. Definitely look into each one, and if you're really into visualization, maybe V-Ray might be the way to go, because you can go a lot further with V-Ray. So definitely check all of these out and pursue the one that kind of interests you the most. So graphics, that's on a similar track to visualization. Of course, your graphic design skill set is a core component along with visualization to every architect skill set. Again, because this is how we communicate our ideas, whether it's through diagrams, it's how we put our booklets together, our presentation boards, your competition boards, you know, how we create icons or even logos if you get into that. And this space is not exactly that diverse in terms of the fact that nearly all of these programs come from one company, which is Adobe, and we utilize many programs from the Adobe Creative Suite. Nearly every firm has some license with Adobe Creative Suite. So I won't go through each one in too much detail, because they're fairly well known, but I will talk about which exact ones we use as architects and why. First up being Photoshop. So of course, this is where we're manipulating our images, and this is where you do all your post-production on renders, for example, but also you could be manipulating diagrams from Google Earth and all this other kind of stuff. I don't think Photoshop needs too much more explanation. InDesign, this is where we really put together our boards, our booklets, our competition boards. This is where we lay out everything that we've created in Photoshop and in our visualization tools and all this kind of stuff. So that's an important one to know. Illustrator, of course, is our vector-based editing software. So this is where we can go in and manipulate some drawings, the line weights on some drawings. We can create really nice diagrams or logos and all those kind of things. Obviously, we tend to use it in conjunction with Photoshop. So you might have a render and then you want to kind of manipulate the line weights on top of it, and you go to Illustrator to do that. So those, I would say, are the core three graphic design tools for most architects. Beyond that, we've then got Premiere. Now, Premiere is obviously getting into the video space. So Premiere is what I'm using right now to edit this video. I guess you could call it the InDesign for video. It's where you can chop up and manipulate videos and animations that you've created. Otherwise, we then also have After Effects, where you can actually create 2D animations. You can even do 3D stuff. It's actually quite a powerful, almost I would call it a rendering engine, but I see it being used more and more. But you can also use it for kind of simpler things like animating 2D diagrams or animating a logo or something like that. So out of these are the ones I see most used by architects. Out of these, I say Photoshop, InDesign, Illustrator are your core essentials for architects. Nearly all architects are using this almost on a daily basis. If I had to condense it down, Photoshop and InDesign would be the two that I would start with, because that's really where it all begins. And then Premiere and After Effects is really about video and animation. But I do see this as a growing space. So, you see more and more architects going down the video and animation route. I do think we'll see architects evolving from 2D images and presentations to videos, more and more videos and animations. And of course, as more and more, young architects and architects get into the YouTube phase, for example, this is an area that I've been improving so that I can make these videos and edit these videos and create After Effects animations for logos and things like that. So, also a great one to have. I will also say all of these are super valuable to have in general, not only as an architect. A lot of graphic designers, this is what they use on a day-to-day basis. So if you're really interested in graphic design, these are the programs to learn and add to your design technology skill set. Finally, the last category, immersive. What is immersive? It's essentially the term or the category I created for virtual reality, augmented reality, game engines. So whilst I can't say that this is a critical core component right now to add to your skill set as an architect, unlike graphic design and modeling and visualization, for example, but I do see this being more and more important, especially as we do transition from or evolve from 2D images on a screen. We can now walk people through spaces in virtual reality. We can use augmented reality to explain to builders how exactly to build something. And the game industry, the game engine industry, is playing more and more of a role in our own industry. They're real innovators in this space, and it's trickling down into our own industry, and we're seeing game engines play more and more of a role in our modeling platforms, maybe even the future of our BIM platforms and all these kind of things. So as you can see from the real-time rendering era, it's really taken inspiration and uses a lot of game engines. So in this space, I just wanted to explain a few of the programs that are being used, and really it's just kind of two core programs, and that's the Unreal game engine and Unity. So these two, for most applications I see being used as architects, whether they're plugins or apps, they're usually Unreal or Unity based. Unreal is typically more favored because it's really amazing graphics. I find visualization, people are gravitating towards it to create images and animations or incredible virtual reality experiences. It also comes with a host of training, free training assets that come from the game engine world. This one I think is going to be a real big influence in the future. Unity is also equally as powerful. A lot of games use the Unity engine as its base. I do see more augmented reality stuff coming out from Unity. It is capable of doing some really high quality images and animations and stuff like that, but typically I see Unity being more augmented reality based, also virtual reality. But either of those, I think it's worth understanding what they are, what they're capable of, and if you do start if you are interested in that game industry, as an architect, it would be a kind of good little superpower to have, because I really do think it will be a big part of our skill set in the future. The only other program I'm going to mention here is Hologram. So Hologram is a plugin for Rhino and Grasshopper, and I've been using it a lot to kind of get into the augmented reality space. It basically allows you to manipulate and view your models from Rhino and Grasshopper through your phone, an iPad, or the HoloLens headset in augmented reality. And it allows you to kind of play with augmented reality without having to the in-depth knowledge of Unity and Unreal. Unity and Unreal, they both of them do have quite a steep learning curve to get the grips with them, but as I say, I do think they are going to be a big part of the future. So I just wanted to flag these up because whilst it's not a critical thing to learn right now, I do think they'd be valuable to have in the future. And also we're seeing people in the architecture industry going over to the game industry, and learning Unreal or Unity is how you see people making that transition. So if you're kind of interested in that as a student, maybe these are the ones to add to your skill set. For me, I'm definitely going to be adding Unreal and also Unity to my skill set over the next coming year for sure. Okay, so to summarize real quick about all the programs we've talked about, these are all of them on one sheet. It's a little overwhelming to see them all on one page. And of course, it's not expected you to learn all of these, right? That would be kind of nuts if you were like at a good level of all of these. There's two things that I would recommend in terms of like how you actually choose which program to pursue in each category. One of them, I think, first of all, gravitate to the ones that interest you the most, right? Especially as a young architect, whether you're a student or just coming into the industry, pursue the one that interests you. Like if you're really into Viz, go and check out the Viz programs and pick up one of those. If you're interested in computational design, check out the computational programs. You know, most likely that's going to be Grasshopper. Pursue the ones that interest you the most initially. The second thing is check your local region to see what practices are actually using. It does kind of change when you get to like the smaller, medium-sized practices. Larger practices, it tends to be more globally similar. But one way that you can do this is check a local job listing and see what programs they say we require you to have knowledge in Photoshop, InDesign, Illustrator, like whatever it is. The other thing you can do is check out our project programs feature on our Instagram page. I'll talk about this a little bit at the end, but we've actually surveyed a few practices about what programs they actually use to develop some of these projects that you see online. So in this next section, we're going to look at some of these categories and at what level you should be at, depending on what your experience level is and what part of your career you're currently in, whether you're a junior designer, senior designer, student, and all these kind of things, as well as specialists and design technology specialists and things like that. So I wanted to kick this section off by first defining the levels of proficiency, because we're all familiar with this beginner, intermediate, advanced. A lot of job applications ask you to rate yourself. What's your Revit knowledge? Is it basic, intermediate, advanced? And these can be very subjective unless defined in some way. You know, everyone's CV, you're an expert in BIM, but then you ask someone to draw a staircase and they clearly have never, drawn a staircase before. So this is just for you guys to give a ballpark figure of what I mean when I say basic or intermediate or advanced, right? And I've done this by breaking it down into 4 kind of parameters, like duration, how long you've used that program, projects, how many projects you've completed on it, what level of experience you is, whether that's university or practice, and maybe you've completed some courses in that area. So, basic, this is where you've just getting to grips with this program. You've been using it for about 6 months. You've maybe completed one project that's a university level project, or maybe you've completed a online course, a 101 entry level course, right? Again, you don't have to tick off each one of these things to be in this range, but just to give you guys a ballpark figure. Intermediate, of course, this is where you're really getting to grips with the program. You've been using it for 1 to 2 years. You've completed a few projects. You've used it at university pretty extensively. I put practice there as well because maybe you've done an internship during the summer and you've got to use some of these programs in practice, and you've completed some intermediate level courses. maybe internally in your university, or you've gone externally online or something like that. Advanced, this is where you're really getting to grips with this program. You've been using it for 3 to 5 years, so maybe like that's the end of your master's, or you're as a junior architect, or you're coming out. You've used it in multiple projects. You've definitely used these programs in practice at this point, and maybe you've completed some more advanced courses as well, just to kind of top up your knowledge. And then finally have expert. I mean, that's where you've kind of been using this program for 5+ years. Use multiple projects, you've used it extensively in practice, and you're at the level where you're actually capable of teaching this course at your local university, or within your practice or something like that, right? So again, this is just a ballpark figure to give you guys an idea of what I say when you should be at an advanced level in the area of BIM or computation or something like that. So here is where I'm kind of defining what your role or experience is, and underneath this umbrella of design technology, the categories that we talked about, and we'll go through at what categories to focus on first, and at what level you should be at depending on where you are in your career. So starting off, we have student. So this is when you're just starting architecture, you have no experience in practice. We're talking about first or second year of university. The first thing I would recommend is to get the basics of your modeling platform, visualization, and graphic designs, because that is the core and the minimum required for you to communicate architecture, your design ideas, and complete those kind of design studio tasks that you're going to need to complete. So that's what I would initially focus on: modeling, visualization, and graphics. Then towards the end of university, so this is kind of moving forwards to the end of your undergraduate, so you've been at university for 3 years, you probably get to a fairly intermediate level in terms of those core skills: modeling, visualization, and graphics. And I would hope that you've maybe touched on some of the other areas. So you've done like a little course in Revit, or if it's BIM or Grasshopper or Immersive, or you at least are aware of those things, okay? This would be the ultimate goal, that you're kind of intermediate at modeling and visualization and graphics, and you're familiar at least with what BIM is, what computation is, and maybe you've experiments with immersive design. So part 1, internship. You've graduated from your undergraduate, you spent a year or so in practice. Here I would imagine you've continued to build on the core modeling, viz, and graphics. So really you're getting to that top end of the intermediate level of BIM, the intermediate level of visualization, graphics, and modeling. And maybe you've got to that intermediate level on one of these other areas like computation, if you're interested in that. I've put BIM here because maybe in your internship you've had to use Revit, for example, in practice, and therefore it's kind of bumped your knowledge up. Again, I think gravitating towards the one that interests you the most. So if you're interested in computation, maybe that's where your intermediate level is. Postgrad masters. So this is maybe, the end of, you've gone back to university, completed your masters, or you're a postgrad student. You've now got 1 year of experience. I'm kind of basing this on the UK system where you've spent a year out. So you've got 1 year of experience. You come out of university. I would imagine you're probably solid at modeling, graphics. You've used BIM maybe in practice, and you've used your masters to kind of really focus on a complementary area like computation. And so now you've got a pretty decent intermediate level. You've almost closed that design technology umbrella of experience. And the reason why I put like an advanced level in visualization, for example, is like that one that interests you the most. Maybe you've got this wicked little skill set of viz, and you come out of university as a bit of a viz whiz, or you've nailed these really cool diagrams in V-Ray or something like that. This is the one area as a new undergraduate that you can create a little superpower when you go out there. Like, unfortunately, as a student, you can't buy experience. Experience is experience. It takes time. But you can develop a little design technology superpower, and that can be really, really useful when you go into that job market. So that's what I'm trying to indicate here with one of these categories going into that advanced level, is that you're developing some kind of interesting little skill set. So as now you've been working in practice for a couple of years. You're at that Part 2 junior architect level. Again, you're going to really be pretty competent in a lot of these categories at the moment. I would say, because you're at the earlier stage of your career, most likely you're going to be in that concept stage phase. So you're probably going to close up another area into that expert category. So like modeling, I would imagine you'd spend a lot of time in Rhino, for example, if you're at a design firm. So that's what I mean, again, of like another category. Maybe you're more of a computational person, and so your expertise will be a little more in the computational side. But here you'll start to develop another kind of advanced skill set. As a design architect, so now you've been working in practice for a pretty decent amount of time. You may have completed your Part 3 to become qualified, and this is when I would imagine you've completed you've completed the intermediate level design technology umbrella. You've filled in some of those gaps of like immersive, for example. It's most people are experimenting with the immersive design in some way in practice. I think my goal at this point of your career is to be a pretty complete digitally fluent architect. That core skill set of modeling, visualization, graphics, you're pretty much an expert at, but you've got a really solid intermediate base at the other things. And if you are at this stage at this point in your career, I would say you've got like a great outlook. Like, you could really go in any direction from this point, right? You have a little bit of experience, you have this great design technology skill set. You could now evaluate where you want to go in your career. Maybe you want to become a project architect, maybe you want to be a specialist of some kind. This would be an ultimate goal to kind of strive towards as an architect or a designer. So the senior architect level, here you have some serious experience. You're getting to that project architect level, or maybe even thinking of starting your own practice or something like that. Depending on the track you go down, I would imagine you'd start to become an advanced level at BIM, for example, if you're kind of deep in documentation stages, or computation if you're in that concept stage is more as a project design lead or something like that. Essentially, you're going to add one of those more advanced categories to your BIM, to your design technology skill set. So again, it could we could like flick around between BIM or computation and things like that. But this is where you're going to really start to kind of be a very digitally fluent, competent architect. So here I've also included specialist skill sets. So if you did want to go down that specialist route, what is the kind of skill set that you'd have to have? Of course, this is where you get into the more expert level of skill sets. And this is mainly because you'd be at the level where you're the in-house expert in this area, right? You'd be the go-to person to ask about this. You'd be doing training and all this kind of stuff. So here, as a BIM specialist, obviously you'd need to be at that expert level in BIM. But I also feel computation would still be super important, whether that be Dynamo or Grasshopper or Rhino Inside. The BIM world and the computational world are becoming more and more interlinked. So I would say, in terms of computation, you would be flirting with that expert level. Of course, also immersive. There would be some BIM aspects of like augmented reality and virtual reality that would start to interact with the immersive world, and modeling as well. You're going to be kind of maybe helping people go from Rhino to Revit, for example. So that's why computation, modeling, and immersive is in the expert level. Visualization, graphics are still key because you're going to be presenting and showing stuff, but not super critical. As a computational specialist, it goes without saying, obviously this is where you would be an expert in computation. Grasshopper, most likely you probably have a bit of a coding skill set at that point. And also modeling, because as a computational specialist, you're probably going to be dealing with the creation of geometry a lot and that kind of stuff. So when I worked as more of a computational specialist, I was really getting into depths with like how a surface is created in Rhino, like what is a NURB surface, what is a double curb surface, and all this kind of stuff. And whilst that's geometry, it's also like really getting to grips with the best practices of a modeling platform. In my case, that was Rhino. So I think those are really important. But of course, like inverted to the BIM Specialist, your BIM skills would still be okay, and you still have a pretty good base in immersive design, whether that's AR or VR or game engines, because again, these spaces are becoming more and more interlinked, which then brings us to the Design Technology Specialist. So this was kind of my role at the moment, and this is where you're really almost completing this design technology umbrella. Again, I haven't put expert in visualization and graphics, because you're not going to be, if you're a viz specialist, yes, you'd be an expert in that and in graphics, but most of the time you're just presenting or showing work like that. So, but the main thing is, I think the two key categories that you have to have here is BIM and computation. So, you have both sides of the coin of the BIM side and the computational side, and of course, modeling that comes in hand in hand with computation. And then you'd also be kind of that go-to person in the immersive side. So you'd maybe picked up a bit of, you'd be pretty solid at Unreal and some other plugins for Rhino and Grasshopper and those kind of things. So that's what I would be as a design technology specialist, or that's what I'm aspiring to be. You're always still learning, which then finally brings me into kind of my last piece of advice for as you're developing as an architect, and that is to keep learning. There's a really interesting kind of piece of advice I was given, that every 5 years you should kind of put your tools down, no matter how expert you are at them, and look into the future and think about what is going to be the next thing, so that you're constantly evolving, not only as a specialist but also as an architect, and you don't become that CAD guy that then never moves on to BIM because they think that CAD's the greatest thing ever. So always keep kind of learning. For example, just to be completely honest about what I'm doing right now. So for example, this year I've really been focusing on upping my Python skills. I really think Unreal is going to be a huge part of the AEC industry in terms of like the future of BIM and visualization and things like that. So I've been spending some time learning the Unreal game engine. And finally, also getting a little bit better at After Effects, especially making all these videos and managing our content online. I've definitely started to pick up a bit more After Effects. So just to be totally honest, these are the kind of areas where I'm been looking to improve on my own design technology skill set. Finally, I did just want to give a shout out to our project program feature that we have on Instagram. So this is where we surveyed a combination of some of the most well-known firms along with some young up-and-coming firms to ask what programs they've used on a specific projects. So tune in and see what programs they actually use. So far, for example, we've seen the majority almost exclusively using Rhino, for example, Grasshopper for computation, Revit for BIM, and the Adobe suite that we talked about. Also, if you're working for a firm and you'd like to submit the tools that you use for a particular project, follow the link below and submit the form, and we'll feature you on our Instagram page. Otherwise, thanks for tuning in. I really hope this video helps to focus on what programs to equip yourself with as an up-and-coming Archi-Tech. This ended up being a lot longer than expected, this video, but I wanted to give you guys a full overview of the tools that we use in practice. And as I mentioned, this overview is just done based on my own experience and my own personal opinion on which programs to equip yourselves with. Otherwise, if you did like this video, give us a like and hit that subscribe button. Pass this on to your friends and help spread the word. Otherwise, we look forward to seeing you in our next video.